So with recent evidence and whatnot, let's begin the timeline discussion. So let's begin with classic timeline. It begins with red, green, blue, and yellow. 3 years later come the events of gold, silver, and crystal. Now this will be the end of the classic timeline. However, there are some debates as whether or not this is a classic timeline because of the discrepancies between Gen 1 and Gen 2. However, because they can connect via link cable, I say it's part of the same timeline. Now let's move on to what I call the advanced timeline because it begins in the Game Boy Advance era, with Fire Red and Leaf Green taking the place of the original, well, quartet, I guess you'd call it. Of course, Gen 3 added Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald version to the mix, and they are confirmed as taking place at the same time. Therefore, we have a very good basis for the advanced generations beginning, at least in terms of games. 3 years later, Heartgold Soulsilver take the place of the original trilogy. Only now, they have the Gen 4 trilogy of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum to go alongside them. And due to their connectivity and circumstantial evidence, let's just put Colosseum and Rangers having happened during those 3 years. It's also at some point during this time where Shadows of Almia and Guardian Signs would take place, and at the tail end of it, Bebe would open the Pokemon Ranch. And if I'm going to add Colosseum, then of course 2 years later, XD Gale of Darkness will happen. Now about 5 or 6 years after Gale of Darkness, or a total of around 7 or 8 years after Heartgold Soulsilver, we have Black and White. Now this is the hardest to judge. You can only really judge it based on the age of the child of the former Rocket Grunt who we meet in the Gen 2 and Gen 2 remakes. So again, it's kind of hard to pin down, but his age is probably anywhere from 7 to 8 years old. So that's going to be the years we go with. Now, 2 years later, and we go on to the last of the advanced timeline with Black 2 and White 2. Now let's begin with the new timeline, the Mega Timeline. Its first games are X and Y, and they take place right around the same time as Black 2 and White 2. And now for the newest games, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, which seem to confirm the multiverse theory. Fun fact, I'd actually heard it before to explain version differences, remakes, but with this, we seem to have the conclusion that we are dealing with different universes, different timelines, however you want to say it. Now, placing this one's kind of hard. I say it probably would run alongside the original Ruby Sapphire. However, I've also seen other people say no, it takes place later due to certain small dialogues. But remember, this is a timeline just being established. We have at least one more game for the Gen 6. If the previous trends are anything to go by, heck, we might even have 2 more games if, the last generation's anything to go by. Ones that I don't have logos for or were just too lazy to add into this ever-growing list is Pokemon Box, which takes place during Gen 3, the Dream Radar, which would take place during Gen 5, and Pokebank, which takes place during Black 2, White 2, and X and Y, and it, oddly enough, seems to have the ability to connect the 2 dimensions or universes or however you want to call it.